The navy blue suit hanging on the wardrobe door was 30 years old, its fabric thinning at the elbows and the second button dangling by a loose thread. But for Arthur Benson, it was more valuable than gold because it was the first gift Margaret ever bought him. It was a Tuesday in early November, and the wind in Philadelphia carried that particular bite that warned of a hard winter coming. Inside the brick row house on 4th Street, however, the air was still heavy with the silence that only death leaves behind. Arthur stood in front of the mirror, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the white dress shirt he had ironed the night before. At 68, his hands were rough, mapped with the scars and calluses of 40 years in construction, but today they felt unusually frail. He looked at the suit again. He remembered the day Margaret had brought it home in 1993. They had just started the company, money was tight, and they were eating pasta 5 nights a week. She had saved her secret tips from waiting tables at the diner for 3 months to buy it. "You're the boss now, Artie," she had said, her eyes crinkling with that smile that could light up a blackout. "You need to look like one." He had worn this suit to sign his first major contract. He had worn it to his son's high school graduation. And now he would wear it to say goodbye to the woman who gave it to him. Arthur noticed the loose button on the jacket. Instinctively, he reached for the sewing kit in the top drawer of the vanity, but his hand froze halfway. Margaret always fixed the buttons. She would sit in that armchair by the window, humming along to the radio, biting the thread with her teeth. The realization that no one would ever sew a button for him again hit him harder than the grief he had been holding back for days. He decided to leave it loose. It felt right, somehow broken, just like everything else. He finished dressing, tying his tie with a simple knot. He didn't look like the wealthy owner of Benson Construction. He looked like what he was at heart, a man who built things with his hands. Before leaving, he walked out to the small backyard garden. Most of the plants had withered with the frost, but the patch of white carnations Margaret had tended to so carefully was still fighting. They were simple flowers, cheap by florist standards, but they were her favorites. "Roses are for show, Artie," she used to say. "Carnations are for staying." He cut a small bouquet, wrapping the stems in a damp paper towel. The drive to St. Jude's Memorial Home took 20 minutes. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening snow. Arthur parked his old Ford F-150 truck at the far end of the lot, wedging it between a gleaming black Mercedes and a silver Porsche. The contrast made him check his reflection in the rearview mirror again. He took a deep breath. This wasn't about the car, or the suit, or the money. It was about Emily. It was about 36 years of waking up next to his best friend. St. Jude's was an imposing building, all gray stone and polished marble, designed to make death feel expensive rather than sad. As Arthur walked toward the entrance, the wind whipped at his thinning gray hair. He clutched the carnations tighter to his chest, shielding them from the cold. He could see people gathering near the entrance, business associates, neighbors, distant relatives. They were all dressed in sharp black wool and cashmere. Then he saw Lucas. His son was standing at the top of the stairs, looking like a prince in a customized Italian suit that probably cost more than Arthur's truck. Lucas was checking his watch, tapping his foot nervously. Beside him stood 2 large men in dark uniforms, wearing earpieces, security guards. Arthur felt a flicker of confusion. Why would a funeral need security? Was the mayor coming? Arthur quickened his pace, a desperate need to see his wife propelling him up the stairs. "Lucas," he called out, his voice raspy from days of not speaking. Lucas turned. The look on his face wasn't relief, or sorrow, or love. It was annoyance. His eyes scanned his father from the scuffed work boots to the frayed cuffs of the navy suit, and finally, to the humble bunch of backyard flowers. "Dad," Lucas said, his voice dropping to a hiss as he stepped down to intercept him. "What are you doing here?" Arthur stopped, confused. "I'm here for your mother, Lucas. I'm here to say goodbye." In that, Lucas gestured vaguely at Arthur's attire with a look of pure disdain. "Dad, look at you. You look like a janitor." Isabella invited the city council members. "The partners from the firm are inside. We're trying to project an image of stability, of legacy." "This is the suit your mother gave me," Arthur said, his voice trembling not with cold, but with a rising hurt. "And these are her flowers." "It's embarrassing, Dad." "It's pathetic," Lucas snapped, glancing over his shoulder to ensure no important guests were watching. "We talked about this. Isabella said you'd make a scene looking like this. We can't have it." "Make a scene." Arthur stepped forward, his heart pounding against his ribs. "She's my wife, Lucas. I built the company that paid for that suit you're wearing. I have a right to be here." Lucas didn't budge. He signaled to the two large men. "I'm sorry, Dad, but you're not going in. Go home. We'll send you the ashes later." The two guards stepped forward, blocking the path like a human wall. They weren't aggressive, just immovable. One of them, a man with a thick neck and dead eyes, put a hand on Arthur's chest. "Sir, please. Don't make this difficult. Mr. Benson has given us strict orders." "Mr. Benson?" Arthur whispered, looking at his son. "I am Mr. Benson." "Not anymore, old man," Lucas muttered, turning his back on him. "Just go home." Arthur tried to push past the guard, a surge of desperation giving him a momentary burst of strength. "Emily," he cried out, his voice cracking. "Let me see her. She's waiting for me." The guard shoved him back, not violently, but with enough force to send Arthur stumbling down the first two concrete steps. He caught his balance on the railing, the breath knocked out of him. He looked up, searching for any sign of humanity in his son's back, but Lucas was already walking toward the heavy oak doors, adjusting his silk tie. The guests who were still outside looked away, pretending not to see the old man being discarded like trash. Shame burned Arthur's cheeks, hot and stinging. He wasn't just being rejected, he was being erased. The life he had built, the family he had raised, the respect he thought he had earned, it all evaporated in the face of a tailored suit and a security detail. He stood there for a moment, the wind biting through the thin fabric of his jacket. He looked down at the carnations in his hand. In the struggle, the stems had snapped. The white petals were crushed, bruising brown at the edges. As the heavy doors slammed shut in his face, sealing him out of the warmth, Arthur stood alone on the concrete steps, the white carnations crushed in his hand, while a muffled sound of amazing grace began to play inside without him. That heavy door just slammed shut, leaving a grieving father out in the cold. If you are still watching and your heart breaks for Arthur, please comment the number 8 below to let me know you are here with us. And if you want to see how this father fights back for his dignity, I highly recommend you subscribe to Dramaine Revenge and turn on the bell right now so you don't miss the justice that is coming. Your support helps us continue creating amazing content that inspires you every day. Now, let's continue to see what happens next. 2 weeks of silence had passed since the funeral, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight in Arthur's empty house, until the phone finally rang with an invitation that sounded too good to be true. It was Lucas. His voice wasn't the hissed whisper from the funeral steps. It was soft, apologetic, almost like the boy Arthur remembered teaching to ride a bike. He blamed grief, stress, and Isabella's hormones. He asked for a meeting. Not at the house, but at the office. "We need to talk about the future, Dad. About the baby." Before heading to the meeting, Arthur stopped at Joe's Diner on 2nd Street, a place that smelled permanently of bacon grease and strong coffee. It was where he had eaten breakfast for 40 years. Sitting in the cracked vinyl booth opposite him was Frank, his former foreman and oldest friend. Frank was nursing a black coffee, his face etched with skepticism. "I'm telling you, Artie," Frank grumbled, wiping crumbs of apple pie from his mustache. "A wolf doesn't invite a sheep to dinner to make friends. It invites the sheep because it's hungry." Arthur stirred his coffee, watching the swirl of cream. "He's my son, Frank. He made a mistake at the funeral. Grief makes people do crazy things. Besides, Isabella is pregnant. I'm going to be a grandfather. If signing some retirement papers means I get to hold my grandson, I'll sign them. Just read the fine print," Frank warned, pointing a calloused finger. "These kids today, they want the fruit, but they hate the dirt it grows in." Arthur left the diner with hope fluttering in his chest, ignoring the knot of dread in his stomach. He drove to the headquarters of Benson Construction. As he pulled up, he noticed the sign out front had been covered with a tarp. Inside, the changes were jarring. The warm oak paneling he and Margaret had picked out in the 90s was gone, replaced by cold glass walls and gray steel. The framed photos of their first cruise were replaced by abstract art that looked like spilled ink. The air conditioning was set so low it made Arthur shiver. Lucas was waiting in the conference room, seated at the head of a long glass table. Beside him was Isabella, looking radiant but sharp in a designer maternity dress, and a man Arthur didn't know, a slick lawyer with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, come in," Lucas said, standing up to offer a handshake. It was firm, professional. Not a hug. Isabella smiled, patting the empty chair next to her. "We're so glad you came, Arthur." We want to apologize for the misunderstanding at the funeral. She took Arthur's rough hand and placed it gently on her baby bump. Little Leo needs his grandpa. We don't want you stressing over work sites and contracts anymore. We want you to be a full-time grandfather. The mention of the name, though, Arthur's own father's name, melted the last of his defenses. He looked at Lucas, eyes watering. That's all I want, son. To be family. Then let's make it official, the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, said smoothly, sliding a stack of documents across the glass. This is a standard succession plan. It transfers operational liability to Lucas. It protects you from lawsuits, debts, and stress. You sign this, you retire with full honors, and the company becomes Lucas's responsibility. It's just a formality, Dad, Lucas added, passing him a heavy, expensive pen. So we can move forward. Arthur looked at the papers. The legal jargon was dense. He saw words like transfer of assets, full acquittal, and restructuring. In the past, he would have taken this to his own lawyer, Henry Cole. But Henry was on vacation, and Lucas was looking at him with those expectant eyes. The baby kicked against Arthur's hand. For the family, Arthur thought. He signed, page after page. His signature, shaky but clear, had over 30 years of sweat and blood. The moment he signed the final page, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The warmth vanished. Isabella pulled her hand away from his and wiped it with a sanitizer wipe. Lucas stopped smiling. He took the folder and handed it to Henderson, who snapped it shut with a sound like a pistol shot. Done, Lucas said, his voice flat. Henderson, file these immediately. Lucas. Arthur asked, sensing the change. What happens now? When do I start my grandfather duties? Lucas stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look at Arthur. He looked through him. We're rebranding, Dad. Effective immediately, Benson Construction no longer exists. We are now Benson Global. We're pivoting to high-end commercial real estate. No more affordable housing, no more small-time projects. But the crew. Frank. The values. Gone, Isabella interjected, standing up. We're clearinghouse. And that includes the image. We can't have the former owner wandering around looking like you do. Lucas slid a single, thin envelope across the table. This is for you. Arthur opened it. Inside was a check for $500. What is this? Arthur whispered. Your monthly stipend, Lucas said coldly. Henderson structured the deal. Since the company technically has zero value on paper due to the restructuring debts, this is the maximum pension we can offer. $500 a month. It's generous for a man with your simple needs. It should cover your heating bill. Arthur stood up, his legs trembling. You traded your father for a signature. You used my grandson as bait. Business is business, old man, Lucas replied, checking his watch. Security will escort you out. Please don't take anything from the office. It's all company property now. Arthur looked at the strangers in front of him. They weren't family. They were sharks in silk clothing. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He simply realized that the son he loved had died a long time ago. He turned and walked to the door. On a shelf near the exit, someone had placed a cardboard box containing the few personal items from his old desk. He picked it up. It was light. Inside was just a framed photo of Margaret. Arthur walked out of the glass building, holding a cardboard box containing only a framed photo of Margaret, realizing that the cold wind outside was warmer than the hearts of the family he just left behind. The house was dark and cold, the only light coming from the street lamp outside casting long prison bar shadows across the living room floor, but the fire in Arthur's chest was hot enough to burn the city down. It was 11 p.m., and a heavy November rain had begun to lash against the windows, sounding like handfuls of gravel thrown against the glass. Arthur sat in his leather armchair in the study, a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand. He hadn't taken a sip yet. He was just staring at the navy blue suit thrown carelessly over the back of the chair opposite him. In the dim light, the suit looked like a deflated ghost. He focused on that loose button again. 2 weeks ago, it had made him feel helpless, a reminder of Margaret's absence. Now, as the humiliation of the morning replayed in his mind, the cold glass table, Isabella's sanitizer wipe, the $500 check, the button reminded him of something else. It reminded him of Margaret's practicality. She never threw things away. She fixed them. But she also knew when something was rotten to the core. "I tried, Maggie," Arthur whispered to the framed photo on his desk. "I try to be the nice guy. I try to keep the peace." The silence of the house was his only answer. But in that silence, he remembered a conversation from 5 years ago. It was right after Lucas had demanded a promotion he hadn't earned. Margaret had sat Arthur down, her face serious. "Arthur," she had said, "we raised a wolf, and one day he's going to get hungry. We need a fence." Arthur set the whiskey down. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked over to the oil painting of a Pennsylvania landscape hanging behind the desk. With practiced ease, he swung the frame aside to reveal a wall safe. He spun the dial. Right to 11. Left to 12. Right to 86. Their wedding date. November 12, 1986. The safe clicked open with a heavy, satisfying sound of steel disengaging. Inside were stacks of old bonds, passports, and a single thick red folder labeled in Margaret's neat cursive handwriting, the Margaret Protocol. Arthur pulled the folder out. He sat back down at the desk and flipped it open. The documents were dated 2018. They outlined a corporate structure that Lucas, in his arrogance, had never bothered to investigate. Lucas thought he ran the empire because he sat in the big chair. He didn't realize that Benson Construction, now Benson Global, was just an operating entity. It owned the trucks, the computers, and the debts. But the assets, the land, the machinery, and most importantly, the massive lines of bank credit that kept the cash flow alive, were owned by a separate entity, Benson Holdings. And Benson Holdings had one sole director, Arthur Benson. Lucas had tricked Arthur into signing away the operating company, but he had forgotten to ask for the keys to the bank vault. Arthur picked up the phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Arthur." The voice was thick with sleep. "It's past 11. Is everything all right?" "Wake up, Henry," Arthur said, his voice steady and sharp. "I need you to file some paperwork tonight." Henry Cole, Arthur's attorney and friend for 40 years, rustled on the other end. "Tonight? Arthur, can't this wait until after Thanksgiving? What happened at the meeting?" "They took it all, Henry," Arthur said, looking at the rain streaking the glass. "They tricked me into signing the transfer. Then they wiped their hands of me. They offered me $500 a month and kicked me out. They even mocked the suit, Henry. They mocked Maggie's suit." There was a long silence on the line. Then the rustling stopped and Henry's voice came back, alert and cold. "Okay, I'm at my desk. What do you want to do?" "Execute the default clauses," Arthur commanded. "I am the primary guarantor of all credit lines extended to Benson Global. As of this moment, I am revoking that guarantee due to a change in management structure that I did not approve for the holding company." "Arthur," Henry warned, "you know what this means. Without your guarantee, the banks will freeze their operating accounts immediately. Their credit cards, their payroll, their supplier checks, everything bounces tomorrow morning. It's a nuclear option." "It's not nuclear, Henry," Arthur replied, his eyes hardening. "It's educational. They wanted to run a big company. Let's see how they run it with zero capital. And the assets. Repossess them," Arthur said. "The trucks, the cranes, the office building itself. It's all leased from Benson Holdings. If they miss one lease payment, which they will, because their accounts are frozen, evict them. Lock the doors. It'll destroy Lucas, Artie. He'll be bankrupt by Christmas." Arthur looked at the red folder. He destroyed himself the moment he decided his father was disposable. "Do it, Henry. Send the notices to the banks now. I want them to wake up to a frozen reality." "Consider it done," Henry said softly. "I'm sorry it came to this, old friend." "Me too." Arthur hung up the phone. He picked up the glass of whiskey and finally took a sip. It burned, warm and grounding. The storm outside was raging now, the wind howling like a wounded animal, but inside the study, it was perfectly quiet. He walked to the window and looked out into the wet darkness, imagining his son sleeping in his penthouse, dreaming of his new empire, completely unaware that the foundation had already crumbled beneath him. Arthur swirled the amber liquid in his glass, a grim smile touching his lips as he whispered into the empty room. "Happy Thanksgiving, Lucas." Arthur just made the call that changes everything. If you are still watching and cheering for him, please comment the number 1 below to show your support. Make sure to subscribe to Dramaine Revenge and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Your support is what allows us to keep telling these amazing stories. Now, let's continue and see exactly what happens on Thanksgiving morning. Thanksgiving morning was supposed to be Lucas Benson's coronation as the new king of Philadelphia real estate, but instead, it began with a declined credit card for a catering order and a phone call that froze the blood in his veins. It was 8 a.m. In his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Lucas was pacing the heated marble floors, barking orders into his headset. Isabella was busy directing the florists who were setting up for their rebranding launch party, which conveniently coincided with Thanksgiving dinner. They had invited 50 of the city's elite. What do you mean, declined? Lucas snapped at the catering manager standing in his foyer. It's a corporate Amex. It has no limit. Run it again. I did, sir. 3 times, the manager said, looking uncomfortable. It says, account frozen, contact issuer. We can't unload the lobster and wagyu beef without payment. Before Lucas could scream, his personal cell phone rang. It was Mr. Sterling, the regional manager of the bank. Lucas smirked. Finally, someone with authority to fix this glitch. Sterling, Lucas answered, putting on his CEO voice. My card is acting up. Fix it. I have guests arriving in 4 hours. There is nothing to fix, Mr. Benson. Sterling's voice was ice-cold, devoid of its usual deference. I'm calling to inform you that as of midnight last night, all credit facilities extended to Benson Global have been revoked. Your operating accounts are frozen pending a liquidity audit. Lucas stopped pacing. Revoked? By who? By the primary guarantor, Sterling replied. Mr. Arthur Benson notified us that he has withdrawn his personal guarantee for Benson Holdings. Without that collateral, your company does not meet our minimum lending criteria. You are currently overdrawn by $4 million. We are calling in the loans, Lucas. Immediately, the phone slipped slightly in Lucas's sweaty palm. But I own the company. I signed the papers. You own the operating entity, yes, Sterling explained, his tone almost pitying. But you don't own the money. Good luck, Mr. Benson. The line went dead. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Lucas's chest. He ignored Isabella's questions and ran to the elevator. He needed to get to the office. He needed to find the files. When he arrived at the Benson Global building 20 minutes later, his keycard didn't work. The glass doors were locked. Taped to the inside of the glass was a bright orange notice, eviction notice, failure to owe pay lease, property repossessed by Benson Holdings. He pressed his face against the glass. Inside, he could see movers, hired by the holding company, already putting dust sheets over the modern art. In the parking lot, tow trucks were hooking up the company SUVs. It wasn't a glitch. It was an extermination. He realized then the magnitude of his mistake. He had treated his father like an outdated accessory, forgetting that the old man was the engine of the entire machine. Trembling with rage and terror, Lucas pulled out his phone and dialed his father. Across town, in the small brick row house on 4th Street, the air smelled of rosemary, sage, and slow-roasted turkey. Arthur was in the kitchen, basting a bird that was far too big for one person, but he cooked it anyway out of tradition. He was humming along to the radio when the phone rang. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and checked the caller ID. He took a deep breath, composed himself, and answered. Hello, Lucas. You ruined me. Lucas screamed so loud that Arthur had to pull the phone away from his ear. You crazy old man. You locked the accounts. You locked the office. The caterers are leaving. I have the mayor coming in 3 hours. Arthur walked over to the window and looked at the gray November sky. I didn't ruin you, son. You fired the guarantor. I'm just a pensioner with $500 a month. I can't help a big CEO like you. Stop playing games. Lucas sounded like he was crying now. Fix it. Call Sterling. Tell him it's a mistake. It's no mistake, Arthur said calmly. You wanted to be independent. You wanted to cut the dead weight. Well, you cut the anchor line, Lucas. Now you're drifting. Dad, please. Lucas's voice cracked, shifting from anger to desperation. Isabella, she's going to freak out. We have the baby coming. You can't do this to your grandson. Do you want him to be born into poverty? Arthur's grip on the phone tightened. This was the moment, the hardest part of the lesson. Do not, Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. Use that innocent child as a shield for your greed again. You are a grown man, Lucas. If you want to eat, you learn to build your own table. You don't steal mine and kick me out of the kitchen. Dad, happy Thanksgiving, son. Arthur hung up. He turned off the phone and placed it in the drawer. He went back to the oven. The turkey was golden brown. He would slice it up later and take it to the homeless shelter downtown. He wouldn't eat alone today. Back in the penthouse, Lucas dropped his phone. It hit the expensive Italian marble floor and shattered, the screen spiderwebbing into 1,000 cracks. He stood there, staring at the broken device, his breathing shallow. The silence in the apartment was deafening. The florists had stopped working. The catering staff had packed up their crates of lobster and left. Behind him, he heard a sound that was even more terrifying than the bank manager's voice. It was the sharp zip of a suitcase being closed. Lucas turned around slowly. Isabella was standing by the bedroom door, wearing her coat, 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases beside her. Her face wasn't sad. It was furious. Isabella, he whispered. Where are you going? I didn't sign up for this, Lucas, she spat, looking at the empty catering tables. I married a CEO, not a bankrupt fraud. My father warned me you didn't have the stomach for business. But the baby, Lucas stammered, pointing to her stomach. Don't worry, she said, pulling the handle of her suitcase. My lawyers will be in touch about custody. I'm going to New York. She walked past him, the wheels of her suitcase clicking rhythmically on a marble. Click, 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 like a countdown to the end of his life. The doors slammed shut, and Lucas was left alone in the cold, empty penthouse, king of absolutely nothing. 6 months later, the bitter winter had melted away from the streets of Philadelphia, revealing not only the green grass of spring but the stark difference between a legacy built on love and a fortune built on arrogance. It was a bright Tuesday morning in May 2024. The sun was shining on a plot of land in North Philadelphia that used to be an abandoned lot full of weeds and rusted car parts. Now it was buzzing with the sound of saws, hammers, and the shouting of men who loved their work. A large wooden sign at the entrance read, "The Margaret Benson Affordable Housing Project, Phase 1. Arthur Benson stood in the middle of it all, knee-deep in wet concrete. He wasn't wearing an Italian suit or a Rolex. He was wearing heavy work boots, denim overalls, and over his white t-shirt, he wore the jacket of his old navy blue suit. It was dusted with limestone and sawdust, but he wore it like a general's uniform. Hey, boss, Frank yelled from the scaffolding of house number 4. We need approval on these window frames. Arthur wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned. Coming. He felt younger than he had in 20 years. The arthritis in his hands seemed to have vanished, replaced by the invigorating ache of honest labor. When he had liquidated the holdings of the shell company, he had recovered nearly $25 million. He didn't keep a cent. He poured every dime into this foundation. At lunch break, Arthur sat on a stack of drywall with Frank, eating a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Frank pulled a copy of the Philadelphia Inquirer out of his back pocket and flattened it on his knees. Did you see this? Frank asked quietly, pointing to a small article on page 6. Arthur looked. The headline read, Benson Global Bankruptcy Finalized, Assets Liquidated. It says the creditors took everything, Frank summarized, his voice low. The penthouse, the cars, the office. Even the specialized equipment was auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. Arthur took a slow bite of his sandwich. And Lucas, rumor has it he's sleeping at a YMCA downtown, Frank said, hesitating. And Isabella, well, the paper says she married some hedge fund manager in Greenwich last weekend. Didn't waste much time, did she? Arthur nodded slowly. He didn't feel joy. He felt a dull, paternal ache. But he also knew that intervening now would be like cutting a butterfly out of its cocoon. It would only cripple the boy forever. He's learning, Frank. It's a hard classroom, but he's learning. You're a tougher man than me, Artie, Frank sighed. No, Arthur corrected him, touching the lapel of his dusty blue suit jacket. I just know the difference between helping and enabling. Margaret wouldn't want me to raise a helpless man. At 2 p.m., the atmosphere on the site changed. It was time for the dedication of the first completed home. It wasn't a mansion. It was a sturdy 2-bedroom brick house with a small porch, exactly the kind of house Arthur and Margaret had started in. A young couple, the Millers, stood in front of the door. The husband was a mechanic, the wife a teacher, and in her arms was a 6-month-old baby girl. They had been living in a moldy basement apartment before the foundation selected them. Arthur walked up to them, holding a shiny brass key. He didn't have a speech prepared. He didn't need one. "Mr. Benson," the young father said, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved us." Arthur smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I didn't save you, son. My wife did. This is her house. You just fill it with love. That's the rent." He handed over the key. The baby girl reached out and grabbed Arthur's rough finger, squeezing it tight. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of fresh lumber and the sound of applause from the crew, Arthur felt a warmth spread through his chest that no amount of money could ever buy. He felt Margaret's hand on his shoulder, light as a feather, whispering, "Well done." As the applause died down and the crowd began to disperse back to work, Arthur stayed on the porch for a moment, soaking in the sun. He happened to glance across the street, toward the dark alleyway between a bodega and a laundromat. His smile faded. Watching him from the shadows was a figure. The man was bearded, disheveled, wearing a dirty hoodie and carrying a plastic bag. He looked like a ghost, thin and broken. But Arthur knew those eyes. He knew the tilt of that head. It was Lucas. Arthur watched as his son stared at the happy family entering their new home, then pulled his hood up and turned away, disappearing into the darkness of the city. It is said that time heals all wounds, but for Arthur Benson, time had simply clarified the difference between forgiveness and foolishness, between enabling a boy and raising a man. It was November 2024, exactly 1 year since the funeral. The autumn leaves in Rittenhouse Square Park were turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson, carpeting the ground in a crunching layer of memories. Arthur sat on his favorite wrought iron bench, a paper bag lunch beside him, watching the squirrels chase each other up the oak trees. He was wearing the navy blue suit. He had learned to sew the button back on himself. It wasn't the neatest stitching, a little crooked perhaps, but it held fast. The suit was clean, pressed, and worn with a quiet dignity that commanded respect from passers-by. He wasn't just an old man in outdated clothes anymore. He was Arthur Benson, the man who was rebuilding the neighborhood. He heard the footsteps before he saw him. They were shuffling, hesitant, dragging against the pavement. Arthur didn't turn his head. He knew who it was. He had been waiting for this moment since the day he saw the figure in the alleyway 6 months ago. "Is this seat taken?" a voice rasped. It was a voice that sounded like it had been swallowed by smoke and cold nights. "It's a public park," Arthur said softly, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. "Sit." Lucas sat down. He didn't look like the prince in the Italian suit anymore. He was thin, his cheekbones protruding sharply under a beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks. He wore a heavy, stained surplus coat and fingerless gloves. He smelled of damp wool and hardship. He kept his head down, staring at his worn-out sneakers that Arthur recognized as a pair Lucas used to wear to the gym, now held together with duct tape. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled the leaves, carrying the distant sound of city traffic. "I'm hungry, Dad," Lucas whispered finally, the words cracking in his throat. Arthur reached into his paper bag. He pulled out a turkey sandwich, thick, homemade, wrapped in wax paper, and a thermos of hot coffee. He slid them across the bench. Lucas took them with trembling hands. He didn't eat with manners. He ate like a starving man, wolfing down half the sandwich in seconds before pausing, overwhelmed by the taste. Tears began to drip from his nose, landing on the wax paper. "I'm sorry," Lucas choked out between bites. "I'm so sorry. I lost it all. The money, the house, Sarah, everything. I was stupid. I was so arrogant." Arthur watched him, his heart breaking and mending all at once. "Yes, you were," he said simply. "And yes, you lost everything that wasn't real. But you're still breathing." Lucas wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked at his father for the first time, his eyes red and pleading. "Can I come home, Dad? Please. I have nowhere to go. The shelters are full. I just need a room. I'll be good. I promise." It was the question Arthur had dreaded. Every instinct in his fatherly body screamed to say yes, to take his boy home, draw him a hot bath, and put him in his old bed. But Arthur touched the button on his jacket, the one he had sewn himself. He remembered the pain of the funeral. He remembered the emptiness of the penthouse. If he saved Lucas now, he would rob him of the most important lesson of his life. "No, Lucas," Arthur said firmly. Lucas flinched as if he'd been slapped. No. But you're doing charity work. You're building houses for strangers. And you won't help your own son. I am helping you, Arthur said, reaching into his inside pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and a $20 bill. I love you too much to give you a free ride again. That's what destroyed you. You thought the world owed you a seat at the table just because of your last name. He handed the paper to Lucas. It wasn't a check. It was a job application form for the Margaret Benson Foundation. Position: general laborer. Wage: minimum. This is the help I'm offering, Arthur said, his voice steady but kind. Show up at the site tomorrow at 6 a.m. Ask for Frank. You'll carry bricks. You'll mix cement. You'll sweep the floors. You'll be treated like everyone else. No special treatment. No, Mr. Benson. Lucas stared at the application. A laborer. Dad, I have a business degree. And look where it got you. Arthur pointed to the park bench. You tried to start at the top, son. Now you're going to try starting at the bottom. Where I started. Where your mother started. Arthur stood up, buttoning his jacket against the chill. He placed a hand on Lucas's dirty shoulder. He squeezed it hard, feeling the bone beneath the coat. Build your own key, Lucas, Arthur whispered. When you can stand in front of me with calluses on your hands and a paycheck you earned with your own sweat, then we'll talk about you coming home for dinner. Not before. Lucas looked up stunned, holding the application like it was a lifeline. He saw the resolve in his father's eyes, a wall of love that was harder than concrete. Tomorrow. 6 a.m., Lucas repeated quietly. I'll be there. Don't be late, Arthur said. Frank hates late. Arthur turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He wanted to turn around. He wanted to run back and hug his son. But he kept walking, one foot in front of the other, listening to the rhythm of his own steps on the pavement. He walked out of the park and onto the busy street, the November sun warming his face. He buttoned the top button of his 30-year-old Navy suit. It didn't feel cheap anymore. It felt priceless. Arthur Benson taught us that a man's true worth is never measured by the price tag on his suit, but by the integrity stitched into his soul. While wealth can buy a company, only love, respect, and honest labor can truly build a legacy, a lesson his son had to learn from the bottom up. If you believe that living with dignity is the best kind of justice, please share this story and subscribe to Dramaine Revenge for more tales of life, karma, and the strength of the human spirit. Remember, the most expensive thing you will ever own is your honor. Never trade it for anything.